So welcome to the COVID-19 version of our Global to Local speaker series. This year, all of our programs will be on racial justice. There are many reasons for doing this, and I won't get into all of the details, but the crux of this is that we need more education about race, racism, and the experience of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in America. As such, in this year's series, you will hear about issues ranging from housing to solidarity building between minoritized groups that have historically been pitted against one another. So without further delay, let us begin. Harper Bishop is Deputy Director of Movement Building at People United for let me start that from the very beginning. Harper Bishop is Deputy of Movement Building at People United for Sustainable Housing, PUSH Buffalo. The mission of PUSH is to mobilize residents to create strong neighborhoods with quality, affordable housing, to expand local hiring opportunities, and to advance economic and environmental justice in Buffalo, New York. A just transition requires us to build a visionary economy for life in a way that is very different than the economy we are in now. Constructing this visionary economy calls for strategies that democratize, decentralize, and diversify economic activity while we draw power down from the few and give it to the many and redistribute resources. Also with us today is Elizabeth Bowen, PhD. She is an associate professor in the University at Buffalo School of Social Work. Her research focuses on health disparities affecting persons experiencing homelessness, housing as a social determinant of health, and social policy analysis. Bowen's teaching interests include community social work, social welfare history and policy, and evidence-based practice. She is currently leading a project funded by the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism to understand and measure the social, physical, human, cultural, and community resources that influence people's recovery from alcohol and drug problems. Bowen received her PhD from the Jane Addams College of Social Work at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and previously worked as a social worker managing supportive housing programs for people affected by homelessness, HIV and AIDS, and other health issues. So without further ado, we will turn our time over to Harper. Welcome, Harper.
Thank you so much for having me this afternoon, and I feel like I'm in the right place. I'm really excited about the research and the work that Betsy has done. I would love to talk offline more about it. And like Liz said, my name is Harper Bishop. I'm the Deputy Director of Movement Building at PUSH Buffalo, or People United for Sustainable Housing. And today we're going to talk about a just transition story, of which we think that ours is one. So PUSH really adopted Movement Generation, which is an Oakland-based collective ideology and thought process and theory of change back in 2016 about how it is that we want to move from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. Nothing that I'm saying today is in this framework will be new. There are communities and communities of color particularly who have been championing them for millennium, and we want to definitely pay homage to that understanding and theorists and practitioners and people on the ground, and even folks, poor and working class people who have intrinsically understood that this is what is happening to them and their lived experience that can mirror it and they can explain in so many words. And the people that we work with, our member leaders certainly can explain what the extractive economy looks like as they've experienced it in their lives. And so I'm not going to go fully into this just transition framework today because as I've spoke to Liz just a few minutes before we pressed record, this could be an all-day training, it could be all week, or it could even be a semester-long conversation around what this looks like. But I do want to hit on some of the finer points in which the extractive economy really is about the 3 E's. Those 3 E's are exploitation, extraction, and enclosure. So the enclosure of wealth, and what we see here on the left-hand side, you'll see the idea of extraction, which is to dig, burn, dump, It's as quickly as you can use resources and materials from the natural world. Work is about exploitation, so driving down wages and making sure that profit-driven work is being done. And then, of course, the purpose of all of this is the enclosure of wealth and power, of which we have seen. And unfortunately, COVID has only brought attention to that and exacerbated the problem. So we know that there are millionaires becoming billionaires and billionaires who are becoming even richer in this moment as the rest of us are finding the social safety nets that were already people in precarious situations are just absolutely gone. They're falling out. And as Push has done its work throughout the last year in our mutual aid and solidarity work, we are trying as a community to champion not a charity framework, but more of a mutual solidarity and justice model. And we have found beautiful results because of it. And yet we know that we as a nonprofit are not going to be able to do all the things that need to be done to hold those who are most marginalized, who are poor and working class and the working poor. We're not going to be able to assist everybody. And so what is the role of government in that? And how can we get resources to those neighborhoods that are most impacted and directly affected, or what we call frontline communities? As you see on the extractive economy, the overarching worldview of this is really consumerism, colonial mindset, and I want to add to it white supremacy. We saw that throughout the past year. People are starting to awaken or reawaken, if we know our movement history, to we are living history on repeat, unfortunately, in this moment. And what lessons can we take from the 60s? What lessons can we take from even before that? In understanding what it is that we need to do in terms of I as a white person in this moment to really come to grips with the fact that we need what I've called a great reckoning, and has been called by many a great reckoning, that we can't go around it, we can't go under it, we have to go through it, and we have to talk about the things and the harm that we have done to particularly Black and Indigenous peoples, of which our entire extractive economy has been built on the backs of stolen labor and stolen land. And that needs to be talked about. And we do talk about it at Push all the time, and you will hear me reference that throughout this presentation. The governance structure, I just want to say, can be debated. Militarism is here, but I believe that a lot of people would debate that capital is really the governance structure, and that militarism is used to protect capital, as we saw in the uprisings this past summer in 2020, that really when private property was at stake, we saw boarded up places, and then we saw militarization of our police forces to protect capital's investments. Of course, we don't believe in such a world. In our world, housing is a human right, and the commodification and speculative market that produces it needs to be completely rearranged and redone and turn our economy into what you see there, which is a regenerative economy. Now, Push is all amidst the middle part. And before we get to the regenerative economy, just wanted to discuss that our issue-based campaigns really are about sometimes stopping the bad. Right now, when we have rental assistance programs, those rental assistance programs we know are not the solution that we need or that we seek. They are not the social housing that we deserve. They are not the human right that we deserve, but they are fulfilling a need in a moment of precarity, and we think that that's important. So our issue-based campaigns are sometimes tackling issues to meet the needs of the working poor immediately, because they can't join us in a larger movement until their most basic needs are being met. And so we recognize that and we understand it. So we also try to have a vision for the future. Our building the new, of course, leads us to what are the solutions that are visionary and oppositional and beautiful and bold and go. And we have so many examples of that. I can't even begin to tell you all of the people who inspire me with their vision and optimism, starting with our executive director, Raul Garmatzian, who is a climate justice leader locally on the state level and nationally, inspires me every day to think about the visionary world in which we all deserve. And it starts there at home, of course, with people who cast that vision, and that we get to live into what is biggest and brightest and brings us joy, and that we're not just surviving through this pandemic together, but we are thriving together, and we are finding joy in both the mundane and the exceptional, and all those things. In order to do this, we need to change the rules, and we need to change the power dynamic. We need to do this at a local and municipal level, of which this year we have an opportunity to do so through our mayoral race, and through the race for sheriff, and all these other important races that are really being looked at. So municipalism is a strategy that we are very much aware and activating, and have been active in for nearly 15 years, which is beautiful. Obviously, we saw in the national scene what can be changed when people get together and organize, and groups come together and get out the vote. We can change presidencies, we can change states from one color to the other. We can do anything and everything. As I always say, the power of organizing and the job of an organizer is to make the impossible politically possible, and actually then implement it into reality. And I get the joy of doing that every single day with incredibly intelligent people. And then, of course, this has ripple effects into the international level. We know that what we do here directly impacts, and one thing that comes to mind is right now in Myanmar, there is a coup, a military coup, and we know that there's a large population here on the west side from Myanmar, and they've been in Niagara Square calling for the freedom of leaders who have now are locked up. And so that has impacts, right? What impacts our community here has ripple effects in international. We need to change the rules, and we need to make those rules. So when we do our organizing, we organize around an issue that leads to a policy change and shift in what it is that we need. And then we are fully dedicated to also seeing the implementation, because sometimes that is where we lose, is that we see the bill through to its passage, but then we do not actually see its implementation. Right now, one that I just want to mention that PUSH has been very active on is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which was a statewide bill that is the most progressive a climate justice bill in the country, even stronger than California's. And we worked a multi-year on that, and we're on the steering committee, and now advise the governor and his folks on what it is that implementation and how it should look, and how it gets to directly impacted communities. Again, we do our work primarily on the west side of Buffalo. Of course, there's disparities in Buffalo that also are on the near and far east side, and looking into that as we talk about racial justice and the need to center communities of color. So we are always thinking about that implementation process and guiding it through. We're not leaving it and taking a hands-off approach, just hoping that it's going to happen. We are really diligently seeking to see it through to the implementation stage. And so that's some of the work that we do. And then you'll see the divest and invest. What we need to divest from is the militarization and over-policing of communities of color. And we need to invest in youth programming, housing, education, healthcare, all of the things that make up a civil society in which people feel that their most basic needs are being met, and drawing down that power from elected officials into us, into our communities and the work that we can do. So we invest in our power, and there are tactics, of course, that we do believe in and we do take that are, movement politics, we think is very much a real thing. We've seen the impact that congressional members such as AOC or a Cori Bush or Ilhan Omar, these are powerful, powerful women of color who are changing the entire landscape. And that's not to disparage elected officials, but to say that when we get people elected, that we also need a co-governance structure in order for them to understand the accountability measures, that once you're in office, you will have a lot of temptation. You'll be beholden to a lot of people, but you're beholden to the grassroots first and foremost, and to your constituents and the people directly impacted. And then, so all of that, of course, then filters into what a regenerative economy would look like, in which we're taking the time to have our natural resources be, the ability for them to regenerate, for them to go through the natural processes they're supposed to, not expediting it, not manipulating it in any way, but really having it be part of a natural life cycle. In this, we see work as cooperative. I helped to co-found an organization called Cooperation Buffalo, which I'm very proud of, and it's a worker cooperative one-stop shop. And it really tries to, especially in this moment, is helping small businesses that might not be able to carry through because of the lack of funding. It can transform them and change them into worker cooperatives where people collectively and workers collectively take control of that business and work in cooperation with one another in order to have ownership amongst and shared and practicing deep democracy, of which we'll talk about the governance structure being such, and how that changes our mind frame from one person with that enclosure of wealth to actually myriad people and disenfranchised folks being able to control the means of production, be able to make decisions. So they can make the decision to say, we feel that our workers are valued and therefore we're still going to get paid, but we're not going to send them to work in the middle of COVID-19. And that was made by Bread Hive, for example, on the West Side. They were able to make that decision because they collectively own the business. And so we even look at worker cooperatives as healthcare, in that moment, that is healthcare to be able to make that decision and have the autonomy and self-determination to do so. And then, of course, it seems so simple, but the purpose of this is ecological and social well-being, and we think, like, why is this a fantastical idea that we would really center our own ecological and social well-being, but in a capitalist society where we are doing anything but, this is a radical notion, and getting people to rethink everything and say, and not have cognitive dissonance around everyone deserves basic needs being met or healthcare, but then really saying no, you really do deserve that. And we should have healthcare for everyone. That should be, especially in the richest country in the history of the world, this should be something we're able to give to our folks here living in the United States. The worldview here is, again, this may sound hippy dippy, but it's the idea of caring and sacredness, whatever that means to you. And we're not defining that for people. We're just saying that obviously shows empathy and a lack of empathy for one another, and sacredness is natural systems, or if you believe in a higher power, or whatever that might look like. And then the governance structure is deep democracy, and we don't define that. We are loosely defining it as obviously participation of everybody being able to have control and voice into the decisions that are being made that impact their daily life. And whenever I present on this transition framework, I talk to folks about the extractive economy, and they can give me a million examples of in their daily life how they're exploited, their labor is exploited, how their communities are policed or militarized, all these things. They can name, the CEO who makes an absorbent amount of money, while workers make less than a living and family sustaining wage. But when we get over to the regenerative economy, all of a sudden there's almost dead silence. And people are like, I don't know what you're talking. I mean, I get what you're talking about. It makes a lot of sense, but I actually don't know examples. I can't give you any, I can't point to any. And that really hurts my heart, honestly, as someone who's worked in the new economy sector for over 10 years now. And so I think my life's work is really towards the new economy side of work and really being visionary about what is possible. And then I get the distinct pleasure and honor to introduce them to an organization called Push Buffalo, which works a lot on the practice of what a regenerative economy looks like. So with that in mind, I want to just talk through some of the new economy strategies that Push has come up with and dreamed about and worked in participatory processes with our members with, to give you a sense of what this isn't just some utopian society that someone somewhere wrote about in a book and we're never going to get to. It's actually happening every day in our place. And it doesn't have to be Ilio Romano, or in Spain is often cited, the Basque region. It's here and now, and it's small things that you can do in order to bring about a regenerative economy in our lifetime and in our daily practice. I think about when we think about the economy, it is not just Wall Street figureheads and suits and men going to Wall Street, but it is really economy, when broken down at its simplest form, means management of home. And so you can even think about how you practice that in your own space. I think about that with my wife all the time, right? What are we doing and how am I taking on responsibilities that is traditionally feminized labor? What is my responsibility to our foster children, and my cooking, all those things that go into building our economy here in our home. And so if you can just think about it as the management of home and not so scary, stock marketing numbers thing, but really internalize it as something that is every day, then I think it becomes something that we much more attainable. And we have a lot of examples actually of the regenerative economy, and that people need to give themselves more credit than they are for knowing what this is intrinsically. So just here's us. Just know that we are here to build a people first economy. Again, that feels like pretty straightforward, but in a profit-driven economy, it is really revolutionary. One of our guiding principles, and has been for 15 years of Push's existence, is that we know what we want where we live. And therefore we trust, and it's Adrienne Maree Brown has written over and over again, that we move at the speed of trust. And we know that that gets us results that can go far, and communities that can be built, and visions that can be gained because we're building trust with community members. And so here is just us at one of many, many, I think we're on the streets of New York here for the climate justice march that really kicked off so much of the work we see with climate justice and the strike for climate and the walkouts that youth have been taking. This is one of the kickoff events, and here you can see many known faces of the Push fam. And so just wanted to start with that guiding principle. Our resident leaders are really paving the way forward, and we take them at their word, like I described. We have participatory processes that we've been able to implement that are really just so beautiful to watch in real time, what we've been able to come up with. And one of the things that is a hallmark of Push that many people, if you know our work, are familiar with, is the Green Development Zone. And the Green Development Zone is a 25 block radius, and continues actually to be expanded out because of, unfortunately, the negative impacts of gentrification on neighborhoods, primarily on the west side. As I said, that is mostly our organizing district, though we have changed our bylaws to reflect the whole city of Buffalo, and then also Niagara and Erie County, because people are being displaced to the first ring suburbs, where they're also being met with cultural clashes. And so now we have folks of color who are going into the first ring suburbs and being met with overt racism. And this has been very difficult. Or folks who have primarily lived in the suburbs, who now urban cores and centers have become very popularized, and what I've deemed white return is occurring. And so we actually see a lot of, again, the community, a lot of the community is being policed in a lot of ways that would not happen if in other times and places, and being arrested or unfortunately shot and killed. We had a member of our community who actually was shot by Buffalo Police Department in our driveway right after we moved to School 77. So there are difficult circumstances of which we are always addressing, and just knowing that our community is in flux, but at the same time, we're able to build really beautiful things. There's some pop-outs there that you can see that include the Grant Street Neighborhood Center, where our youth programming takes place. I live literally right behind it, so I get to see it every morning. It is a beacon of hope for me as I see those youth, and most of them are immigrants and refugees who are newly resettled, who are finding home and community and space and place there. You see an example and another pop out of our workforce program that we were the first people to champion a net zero house in the whole region, and to show that that is an example of what can be done. We know that frontline communities and communities of color, they bear the greatest impact and burden of environmental injustice, and yet contribute the very least to it. And so we want to tie those things together to say that these communities that we're living in, and that we are in service to and of and from, and collaborate and co-conspirators with. They deserve everything that a white middle class family living in Williamsville deserves, and then some, and that it's not exceptional, that it can happen here and that it should happen here. And that's, we pick projects that root our values and place the most directly impacted communities at the center of those planning processes. So when you see the Net Zero House and you see the coloring and you see where it's located and all those different things, that was not by happenstance. That wasn't just because we decided to plop that down and work with, we have obviously design teams and contractors and all of those various people, but first and foremost, we have people who are telling us what it is that they need. And so one of the things that was mentioned from Betsy's bio was about supportive housing, and actually identified that as a major need in our community. And our most ambitious project to date, Westside Homes, is in the middle of just being finalized with its funding, and ground should be broken in November. A third of that is dedicated to supportive housing, and Best Self Behavioral Services is helping to the people who go through their Lighthouse program, mostly women, who have been through that program and have it's either alcohol or some other substance abuse diagnoses. They will be the first people that will be able to come into and be part of that program. And so we're really, really excited. It's a 46 unit project. And it's taken us years of planning, but we're finally coming to fruition. We're hoping that it will be fully rented out by next summer, and incredibly excited, again, talking about processes that are community based. We go and we have community outreach in events, and even though planning when we started, things are transient, people move. Some people were part of the process and they're not anymore. And so when we were dropping, we were having one of our meetings at West Delavan in Congress, and the neighbors were very much united against. They did not want Push to put up a building because there's no green space for their children to play, and they did not want them to be in, they were already playing in the street as it was. And of course, we know the inequities that exist between why some people have this beautiful Olmsted Parkway, and 4 blocks away, you can have the Parkway system, and you have the beautiful Bidwell Parkway, which I run on regularly. And then 4 blocks to the west, you have absolutely no space for children to play, right? And that inequity is very much felt in a very highly densely populated area like the West Side. Unfortunately, a boy was run over and killed like right around when we were having those conversations. We were already trying to figure out how we could reconfigure the project, because I think that Push is a nonprofit developer as well. And so we have the ability to proliferate and create affordable housing units through Buffalo Neighborhood Stabilization Corporation. And I think that communities, of course, are disenchanted by corporate developers who come in and tell them what they need in their community, make no they make either no effort, or they pay them lip service, and then they go and get their zoning and variances and they move forward, right? And that is not how we operate. We operate just the opposite. We hear from people, we talk with them, even we think they give us good input. They're telling us, again, we believe people, like, they have the solutions, they know what they want where they live. And so we're there to work through it. Even though we did retain our zoning variances and everything that we needed through the city of Buffalo, we decided that we heard from enough people that this was not what they wanted. And so we took painstaking, planning and processes, and we went back to the drawing board and we talked to our team and our community development, and we ended up putting density on another already gentrified area and nixing that building completely on that project. And now, hopefully in the summertime, we'll be going to the youth and asking them what it is that they want to see on the green space of the lot we retain, and to do fundraising to bring either gym equipment. It sounds like a basketball court is definitely a high priority, and sometimes I go play with them, because I live just a couple blocks away, and consider it my community as well, of course. And yeah, so like that's a major success story. And they really, when they went back to the Common Council, were kind of flabbergasted, right? And talked to the Buffalo News as well about, we really didn't have any belief that this organization was going to do anything different than what has been done. And they did. And that's not to to toot our own horns, but it's to say like there is a way that you can go into community and come correctly and really have those conversations and those hard, difficult, tense conversations at times, but really fruitful. And at the end, we're all better for it and our community stronger because of it. And we found a solution that works for everyone. And really, I think it amounted to us maybe losing 3 units, but that's nothing in comparison to what was to be lost had we just continued with our plan as we had it. And you'll also see a pop out there of the WASH project, which is become a really a central cultural point for the Burmese community, and is also a necessity, right? We're thinking about like things that people need, not charcuterie plates or $5 macchiatos, but like actually people who need to wash their laundry. That's meeting a basic community need. And we are so thrilled that that building is almost in completion. We did a complete rehab of it, and it will be online hopefully sooner rather than later this year. And we are very excited. Every time I run past it, I get really excited. It's been too long missing a component on Mass Ave. So those are just some examples of what you can find in the Green Development Zone. There's much more that we can talk about, but just letting you know. I'll just go through this really quickly. We because we're trying to tell you all the cross section of where Push is imagining new systems and structures, and so Push Blue is again one of our what we would consider like a social justice enterprise, and it addresses Buffalo's combined sewer overflow problem, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. We used to have a very state-of-the-art sewer here in Buffalo. That is no longer it. And so when it rains, of course, that can have detrimental problems of the sewage overflow and it going into our drinking water and other really unhygienic things occurring. And so we really have taken that and we want to use a model of our social enterprise landscaping business. We have multiple benefits that our impacted communities can feel. We add them personally to all of our projects, and then we contract out to assist and lead with the city of Buffalo and other governmental agencies, and letting them know what this model looks like and how it can be used at a larger scale to mitigate the harm of the sewer overflow problem that still exists. I won't go through all of this. Oh, I think actually, sorry. So yeah, so of course, some of the impacts of sewer, of the overflow is that we have a lot of folks who come from communities that are fishing communities, and so when they're fishing and like there's toxins or different things that are occurring, that makes it much, they're not able to actually do that, and for some people that is how they're being fed and feeding their families. So that's something that I wanted to highlight. We are creating green jobs. So these pictures are incredibly hopeful. Again, when we build anything, we actually contract with ourselves in order to, I don't know if folks that are watching this may not be familiar with what a community benefits agreement is, but a community benefits agreement is, when you are a developer or there's a project that's occurring, what other benefits are coming to the community. And since we have the power as a nonprofit developer to hire people, we're leveraging that monetary and fiscal power that we have. Because of course we have to outsource many of, it's not like we are contractors and we are designers and all these and architects and things like that. That's not what we are, but we can contract with people. So if they want contracts, then they have to, really bend and to the rules of what Push is putting forward, which always includes, as you see here, workforce development, hiring people within our community. We have zip codes that we have a hiring hall, which is a hybrid economic development hiring hall that hopefully trains people on the job to do basic labor, but then like through, obviously through learning the processes, they become more skilled laborers. And the hope is to get them from, this project base to showing up, and then those folks actually hiring on our folks from the hiring hall. And this has happened in many instances where they'll find really good workers, and they'll be like, yeah, let's continue, and they'll go on the payroll of some of these companies and development companies, which is like, a very, it's awesome, right? Like it's a great aim, and it goes from people being underpaid or having low pay to a family sustaining wage, and so that's like our aim is always to get people to there and to yield the power and wield the power that we have in order to do that. We want to train people in jobs of the future. Clearly, we know that there are people that are still training folks at where we are today, and a lot of those jobs are going to become obsolete, particularly with like what I mentioned with the CLCPA, again, Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and the implementation thereof, where fossil fuels will become obsolete. Even if people are in denial about that right now, everyone within the industry is like, here's the secret, like it's slowly happening, we're just like not admitting it, right? And so we have to think long term, what are the jobs that people can be trained in? One of those photos you'll see, that is the solar panel and solar array and community solar project on our headquarters at School 77. Push Buffalo is proudly the first community-owned solar project in all of New York State. This is because you have to actually register as a utility in order to do that. They make it as hard as possible in order to do that. And the paperwork that you must muster through is hundreds and hundreds of pages, which of course, not just any CBO is going to be able to accomplish or person. Luckily, we are lawyered up and we are ready to make sure that those things do not stand in our way and to give those opportunities to our community members. So that's some of the pictures that you see. You see like permeable pavement will probably come up, but also when we're creating rain gardens, that's like another way to mitigate the harm that would be caused otherwise by sewer overflow and all that good stuff. We're, of course, restoring vacant properties to green affordable housing. You see right here, this for a long time. This is also on Massachusetts Avenue on the west side. A before and after shot. This building is used both for affordable housing units, and then that room that you see on the left is a meeting space. Oftentimes we have people there, obviously not during COVID, but that's a familiar space in which we have coalition meetings and is really used as a community space and community room. To the left, which you can't see in the parking lot, Max Collins, a local artist, has done Wheat Paste by Milton Rogovin. If you're not familiar with Milton Rogovin, he was an acclaimed photographer from Buffalo who is famous for paraphrasing, but saying that the rich have their photographers, the working class need theirs, and so spent many years photographing particularly Black and brown folks in factories in the working class to visibilize Black working class people's experiences, of which are very much absent. There's not many people and not many photographs that you'll see that involve that population. And so that was another way that we could highlight, and we try to highlight in all of our work, how cultural organizing can also play an important role in community economic development. And then again, we have many projects through Push Blue with rain gardens, green roofs, stormwater planners, permeable pavement, pollinator gardens, community gardens. This is really woven throughout all of our work. If you take a green development zone tour, which I encourage everyone to do so when COVID is over, or even if you want one during COVID, we have been walking people around the neighborhood masked up and socially distanced. So if you want to come see our work in person, it's always much more compelling to see it that way. My email is harper@pushbuffalo.org. I'd be more than happy to take anyone and everyone on a tour of the Green Development Zone. I love doing it. And yeah, you can come see what we're doing. And here's some examples of what I've just said. Permeable parking pads are wherever we can put them, and rain gardens, and the 14th Street Garden is just one of my favorite places to go. If you just need a respite, this is the place for you. It's beautiful, and it also is completely representative of the values that we hold dear. In this moment of COVID, we see how important holding food systems in community are. So first, food systems. Secondly, the plots to rent are less than $50 for the entire year. I want to say it's like $25 to $30 actually. And families will get together, mostly immigrant and refugees who cannot purchase the culturally competent foods from places like the Co-op or Tops or wherever it might be. And so this is their opportunity to build that kind of cultural and community aspect. And there's a lot of trading that happens between gardens, which is cool, and people get to know each other. And even if they don't speak the same language, they're doing so through food, which we know has always brought people together. And yeah, so it's a beautiful and sustainable place, of which I always start my tours there because it's just it's really wonderful. And then trying to get people out of there is really hard because they feel the zenness of the space and want to stay. So it plays a number of different roles. And then School 77 is where Push is now headquartered, and this is kind of as we see it, a model for how community development again should be, and that if we're using public subsidies, which is our dollars, if our dollars are going to be used for community and economic development projects, that really it should look like School 77. It should not look like the multi-billion-dollar corporation who wants to move their headquarters from one side of the street to the other because they're sick of their offices and know that they can hold local government hostage by demanding subsidies for a building. And we think that is a terrible use of public dollars, as I'm sure you do as well. So again, we're looking at return on investment here. Like, these are not just fantastical ideas or just altruistic. They're actually pack a punch, and they actually do return a good amount to the community. So here you can see, we've already talked about the solar array that's on the top. I think the picture after this is actually another shot of that. So you'll be able to see our offices are on that bottom floor. So my office, you can actually see in this picture. There's also the top two floors, again, identified through a community process, that what was needed in the community was senior housing, and that people wanted to have senior housing. So there's 30 units of affordable senior housing. I'm talking people are paying between like $250 to somewhere like $450, $550 with with their vouchers, or because we accept, of course, public assistance and voucher and all those different things. But they're beautiful, and if I could live in them, I would, because they're very affordable and very beautiful and new. And they're, again, another example. They also, the importance of this building is that we programmed it intergenerationally on purpose, because people also said through a community planning process that they wanted that. So now we have our seniors and elders of our community interacting with youth who are on that right side. You'll see there, that's our gymnasium. So Piece of the City, who works primarily with youth and does after school programming. There's a gym there, as well as Ujima Company, which is the longest running repertory theater for African Americans, and is incubated, whether it is Indigenous, LGBTQ, feminist theater companies. All of those have come out of Ujima, and then Push Buffalo. So they're interacting with multi-generational folks and programming that is occurring there all the time. We have a dance studio that also, Verve Studio, who teaches breakdancing in our community room. And our community room is available as, again, a public good and a public benefit. So if you're a nonprofit or you're looking to do something, the School of Social Work wants to come have something in place, you're welcome. I'm the person who schedules that and keeps the calendar. And we charge like corporations because we feel like, or like foundations because we feel like, that they can afford to do that. But for community-based organizations, we welcome you into our space and would love to have you really experience what we get to experience on a daily basis, which is incredible beauty. And so again, this has been years in the making. It's only been 2 years that we've been in there. But it took years of planning. And if you aren't familiar with the history of that, what is also beautiful about School 77 is that it used to be a Buffalo public school. And that's why we call it School 77, of course. And pretty much everyone in the neighborhood has a connection. And it's beautiful when people walk into the building and say, I was a janitor here, or I was a teacher for 50 years, or I went to kindergarten, or I went to first grade. Oh, that's where I took music class. Oh, that used to be, right? And we have some of the old like posters to just pay homage to that. And folks really, when this building was it not in use and not in productive use, folks really talked about the what was and really aspirationally what could be. And that campaign really just started with us asking one simple question with a card that said, do you want PUSH to retain School 77 as an asset for the community? And Councilmember David Rivera at the time put a moratorium for a year on the building. And Raul famously will talk about co-founder Aaron Bartley speaking to him and saying, Aaron, this is like bigger than anything we've ever done. Like, how are we going to make this happen? And she always says that he just kind of said, let's just do our best. And our best was good enough, I guess, because we had overwhelming support. We had hundreds of cards of people saying, yes, PUSH should retain this as a community asset. And what normally, and I just sometimes do workshops on what usually happens to buildings like that. They become unaffordable loft apartments for people who return to the city. They do not become safe, affordable, multi-generational community spaces for us to retain as a community asset. And so this is an exception that I tout all over the country, that this is what we need to do, is to reclaim our spaces, because these are our spaces, and we need to make sure that they maintain that and stay that way. So again, you'll see this is again, going with the permeable pavement and the garden, and then on the level above that is where the solar array is. And so the seniors are able to walk on this rooftop in the summer and just enjoy the outdoors and to be there. And yeah, I mean, I won't go through all of this, but just we have a real systems impact, and that's what the regenerative economy is. Just not. And I want to flag here that our impact is done on a horizontal scaling, which is very important to me to bring up. That people always ask, how can we scale these systems? And what I tell them is, what we don't want to do is to recreate capitalism's vertical scaling, of which really gets us at a point, a top-down approach instead of the bottom-up approach that, of course, we take, and that we meet with neighborhoods to understand what it is that they need, and we don't go anywhere that we're not invited. We do like to be invited into communities in order to make sure that they are self-determined and on board with what we're trying to create. But you'll just see, the significant investment in green affordable housing and green infrastructure through the Green Development Zone at the tune of $60 million. We've transformed more than 1,000 homes through our weatherization and green retrofit program, which is PUSH Green, which is having a market improvement on people's lives. One of our members, Luz Velez, famously says, "PUSH Buffalo saved my life." And she does not exaggerate on that. She was a person with extreme asthma. It tells her story every which way to say what was able to be given to her through NYSERDA and us being boots on the ground. Because governmental agencies might not be the most trusted source in a lot of these communities, but PUSH Buffalo is. And so the impact that we can have through that, and in partnership with governmental agencies, to say, like, that is our money and we want it spent in these ways, right? Over 250 green jobs have been created. We have more than $130 million in new investment and on. I would also just highlight that in our portfolio, we have 99 rentals. We're working on home ownership at this point because we also know that's a pathway to generational wealth and to building generational wealth. So we take that very seriously as well and are working on that, as well as we have 4 different commercial buildings that we also were able to support people with affordable rents and to meet the needs of the community. And then through our mutual aid efforts, we several times canceled rent in order to be an example of, if we're asking other people to cancel rent, then we ourselves need to cancel rent as well. And so we had gracious funders who stepped forward to partner with us to make sure that people were taken care of during the pandemic, especially with our elders in our community who may not have had the ability or the savings to weather the storm otherwise. So we did that several times, very proud of that. And we provided rental assistance in the last year to over 160 families, and also including our undocumented siblings who were coming out of the Batavia Detention Center because you need an address in order to be released. And we thought it was very important to make sure that they were protected in that moment of not getting COVID and fearful of death. And also, as the stimulus checks were coming out, of course, they had no recourse. And so we wanted to make sure that they were given resources even when our government was not providing for them. So I could go on, but I'll stop here. And of course, we're educating future generations towards a just transition. That's most important to us. So famously, we have a saying that we use around Push Buffalo: what the hands do, the heart learns, or it teaches the heart. And so we're hoping for generations to come in a leadership pipeline that understands why all these things are intrinsically understanding. So the next generation, when I do these workshops and ask what a regenerative economy is, we'll have all sorts of examples to give. And I'll stop there, and I thank everyone for their time.
Thank you so much, Harper. That was fantastic. And my mind was buzzing the whole time, and I have so many things I want to ask you about. So I will rein myself in and keep it to a couple of questions.
Sure.
But I'm very excited to have a little bit of a conversation here. So one thing I jot down while you were speaking that I wanted to ask you is, and it's kind of broad, but I think in social work, we don't always kind of talk enough about how the funding of services impacts so much of what we do. And I mean this really across pretty much all areas of social work practice. So I see this, in my own experiences working in housing programs. I see this in students and colleagues working in mental health care, working in various community-based social services. And what I mean specifically is that we are so constrained by how things are funded, whether it's publicly funded in a lot of programs, a lot of them, it ultimately is often public money that we're talking about. Sometimes it's privately funded, sometimes it's a combination. But in either case, what we're doing has already been prescribed essentially by the funder to varying degrees, but almost always to some degree, and often to an extremely high degree. So as a provider, it really prevents you, I think, from doing best practices. It prevents us from recognizing our clients and the people we work with, from recognizing their full autonomy, because again, we're kind of doing what our funder says we have to do. And it ultimately harms the frontline community or the client, first of all, because people don't have enough of a voice in the kind of programming or services that they're getting. So I know I'm describing a super broad problem, but I got kind of excited and optimistic thinking about a more regenerative economy. So what, I guess I just want to ask you, like, how can we even imagine how that would look differently, like in a more just and more regenerative economy?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I was on a phone call in which a funder had come to us and said that they wanted to earmark money for a certain thing. And our executive director, I've mentioned her before, Rawa, was like, our modus operandi is that we need to dictate to the funder what it is that we're doing and then sell them on the idea of what it is that we are doing so that it isn't as you describe. And I think that you're absolutely correct that that happens, and it happens far too often. And I think that she is speaking to, and appropriately to, when that can happen, right? And I think that what you're saying is there's sometimes where when maybe you feel like it can't happen. I think that what is unique about Push, and where I would say, especially like between micro and macro level social work, in which we tend to get the macro folks over at Push, which we love, of course, because they see the big picture and all that good stuff. I'm thinking about our development projects in which there is, as you said, very prescribed ways of funding, and you have to meet these metrics. And if you don't meet them, and of course Push's projects tend to be in this category of like what they consider like high cost projects. And it's because we've included all these sustainability measures, which of course is, as you talk about the social determinants of health and how housing, I mean, we're understanding that housing is healthcare. How could you not? We're spending all this time in our homes right now. So understanding that, but for us in an organizing mentality, it's like organizing, building our base, building the power to have those frontline communities say to governmental institutions like NYSERDA and other folks that we do think is completely partners in this work. So let's get this, I want to make sure you understand that we are partners in this, or like when they're scoring us, that we're telling the entire context and picture, which is that everything that will be built in terms of your investment through HCR, through housing, right, is going to be obsolete in a few years because the CLCPA implementation is taking place in this year. So why would you, don't be the corporation who plans for obsolescence and planned obsolescence, actually plan as we're planning for the future with our workforce development, with our housing projects. And so actually your dollars go further, you're hearing from the community directly, and we can play it kind of both one way or the other, right? We can either say, we're going to go nicely, you're going to follow community in their lead, or we're going to get our organizing team and those community members to Albany, and they're going to be in your face, and they're going to do a die-in in the governor's office, and they're going to keep going because we have some of the most resilient and folks that you'll ever meet who will do that, right? And so what I have found in the partnership with the School of Social Work, and I was saying this before, is every time I hear from the School of Social Work, I immediately respond, is because there's people who are thinking through those things, and what things that we need in community with all of you is that because generational trauma, because of what has been taken in these communities, what is ubiquitous is that we as organizers live with people who are traumatized and working through that, and then we get vicarious trauma,
right?
And or we're trying to be armchair social workers and we're not trained at all. And so it's no wonder the last 2 or 3 hires I've made for organizers are social workers as well, because I think that is an underpinning of what we need and underlying and able to bring this all together. So I mean, I guess this is a long version of I think that Push is half living into what system and structure you're anticipating that a new regenerative economy could allow these funding streams to dictate, and doing it in reverse, much like as we looked at the regenerative economy from the extractive, is we're going to start at this point, and we need you all to catch up with us, and we need you all to be here with us. And we find that actually we have built enough power in order to flip that dynamic, and power building along with the work that you all do, I think is really important, and that actually they're very complementary, and that I see more social workers, especially at the macro level, becoming organizers. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you for that explanation. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And many of us who've been in this field, I think, get very conditioned to this, well, we're, constrained, we have to do what the funding needs. And so you're showing an example, I think, of how push has been able to somewhat flip that so that you
Mhm.
are kind of constraining what's
Yeah.
which is a fundamental and really important power shift, I think, if we are gonna
Yeah.
get
And I
it.
don't say, and I want to like admit, we're not able to do that with every relationship, as you
Sure.
said correctly, but I think that we are well on our way to doing that. And it's been a beautiful shift in my mind, and for her to just like reiterate that to us of like, we need to fight the conditioning. Like, we are telling the funder what it is that we think is valuable and what our community says is valuable. And therefore, like, we come from that place, and it's a good reminder for us all.
Right. Liz, do we have time for a few more questions? And do you have time, Harper? Yeah.
Yeah, I have you scheduled till 3:30, so
Okay,
please.
perfect.
Okay, yeah, so Betsy, please feel free to ask one or two more questions. Absolutely.
Okay, great, because I do have a couple more. So here's another kind of broad one, but I started thinking about it at the beginning when you were talking about like the example of housing as a human right, which is like, I literally use that phrase. And,
Oh, I'm sure you do.
right, like hopefully many of us, I think, want to see that.
Yeah.
So like that is just one example of housing as a human right, kind of as the goal, versus the current reality where we have things like rental assistance that we know is kind of a stopgap. And so
Yeah.
the way I kind of think about it to myself is like this tension of the world we want to live in and the world we do live in. And I think
Yes.
for, a long time as somebody in academia, I was always kind of quick to criticize, if it felt like efforts were not kind of structural, if it felt like it was just something kind of superficial, I would be the person, critiquing that and being like, no, we need structural change.
Yeah.
But it has kind of hit me the longer I've been doing this that, it's one thing for me to do that from a place of comfort and privilege. Of course, I can say we should focus on longer term efforts when, I have my own stable housing and I'm comfortable. It, to me, that seems very ignorant of me to not also focus on, well, what would help people that are struggling right now, because a lot of people are struggling. So again, I know this is a broad question, but I would like to hear from you and your work. Like, how do you think about that tension, and how do we walk that line so that we don't, I guess, get caught up only doing the short-term stuff and neglecting the long-term vision, or vice versa, like only talking about the long-term stuff and ignoring the immediate struggle, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes complete sense. It's something that I think about all the time, all day, every day. And I think you've articulated it actually really incredibly well. I was a similarly minded person. I also think that this is the left particularly was not participating in electoral politics, saying that, you can't change the kind of like Audre Lorde asked, like the master's tool won't dismantle, right? Like this kind of idea. So we're not going to play in electoral politics because it's not going to get us like the structural changes that we need. And then people all of a sudden were like, oh wait, Donald Trump can be elected if we are absent that, and Georgia doesn't turn blue if we don't participate, right? And then suddenly I feel like some of the self-righteousness that admittedly I feel like I had, like it kind of melted away, right? And like people were like, actually, we need to be deeply engaged in this, and governance can come in many different forms. And that could be the governance of a community land trust that we started in the Fruit Belt, or it could be co-governance as an elected official. As you're describing it, I very much felt similarly to you, is that we like, that is that just reformist, and like, of course, what do you not want to be in the cool kids club but a reformist, right? Like, no, I'm a revolutionary, I'm a transformative justice worker, like I am not a reformist, right? Then I think much like the electoral politic moment hit in COVID, I think that people have really understood, and I know that I did, after fielding phone calls literally for 12 to 13 hours a day when we were starting our mutual aid hub, and getting groceries and basic needs and medicine, and the digital divide here. We read all the statistics, but it is hella real. And just like meeting all those basic needs, and housing is healthcare, housing is a human right, and being like, if this person can stay and they're telling me that this is the one thing that brings them stability, one thing that brings them comfort. Their family has always been here. They always knew this neighborhood. This is where they grew up. This is where they want their kids to grow up. and it's going to stop them from displacement, yes, I'm going to cut that $500 check, and you can label me all the reformists that you want, but I know that it will meet a material need. And that is also what populism is about, is like absolutely being able to meet the material need of a person. And as I showed you on that graphic, to identify where it is on the chart and to call it out as such. We are stopping the bad right now. This is not the intended goal. We are still doing the long-term work. And actually, we at a certain point, 9 months in, decided to pivot away from our mutual aid efforts in order to get back to our very structural and like what we were really built for and good at, and to say we need to go win those climate justice and housing justice campaigns. We need a tenant bill of rights. We need our housing justice for all. We need good cause eviction. We need the housing housing access voucher program. We need cancellation of rent. On a national level, we need a homes guarantee and more socialized housing and investment in what has been definitely in our context, BMHA is just a shell of itself. We need reinvestment in, municipal housing programs and all these different things. So I think like when we started to map through the Just Transition framework, okay, we're stopping the bad right now and identifying, and everyone's clear that that's the tactic, but that's not the goal. Our goal is, of course, all these other things, and being able to then say how these strategies align. So when we have a tenant advocate who's meeting the needs of people right here, right now, at an unprecedented amount of cases and coming in a day, we know that there's no way that Tanisha from the East Side is going to be able to join our movement for a homes guarantee on a federal level if she can't even make rent and feed her children, right? And so like that's just like one example, of just like of folks that we're working with and that we have close relationship from East Side to the West Side, and we're fielding all those calls. But I think you've done a really good articulation of what it is that we feel all day, every day, that this isn't the end goal, but the end goal is over here in this visionary place. But right now, like we can help people and we can also educate them through why rental assistance isn't, the end goal, and why that is, and what you really deserve, right? And why you've been taken advantage of, and the power dynamic that is between you and a landlord, and the access to information that you don't have, that they have, and the power dynamic. And then they get really pissed off, and then they just want to join the movement, right? So like, that's like the best political education, right, is coming from these moments of what I think people feel like are despair, but like, it's like, yeah, in a crucible, we're all learning together how to like hasten us to a visionary goal. And yeah, so thank you for that question. I'm always thinking about it.
Yeah, and that how you described it, I think is really cool and makes sense in that an organization like Push, and I think this is somewhat unique, that you can provide some of those immediate types of assistance that are needed, but kind of from a visionary lens and from a political lens, and to make that kind of political education as part of it. Again, it is somewhat unique in my
so I know, so I've been told everywhere we go, people are like, I don't even know how Push does all these things. I'm like, I don't either.
Right, how do you even fit it in your day? But so let me ask a somewhat more specific question. So I really enjoyed hearing the story you told about when Push was planning for, you had this idea for a particular building, and then how you did what sounded like pretty deep community engagement and really listened to people and heard, that this was in fact not the vision that a lot of people in that community saw. And as a result, actually changed the plans, which again, we know is not what often happens. And I sometimes teach community social work classes. So I'm teaching social workers kind of how to think about community engagement. And just, part of the problem is the first thing you mentioned of like, a lot of times people don't even do this or pretend to do it. Like they don't even talk to the community at all, or they do a very superficial job of it. So like, that's the first thing we have to overcome. But then I think the next thing, if you are really trying to do this, something I often talk about in my classes is, communities, of course, are not homogenous. A
Right.
community often does not speak with one voice.
That's right.
Not
That's right.
everybody wants the same thing.
Mhm.
Not everybody is coming from the
Mhm.
same positionality within that community.
That's right.
So, with regard to that example with the building, or
Mhm.
just in general, I'd like to hear, how do you, navigate that complexity of figuring out
Mhm.
what the community wants when, again,
Yeah.
it's a complex and dynamic thing that doesn't speak with one voice. Yeah.
I love that question. That's an incredible question. Again, one we're always thinking about, and taking different stakeholders and who are the different players. We're trying to understand the landscape, the politics of that place. Each community is different, and again, we think about hyper local, right? Like it could be a few blocks is what we define as community,
Hmm.
and so thinking about that. In that instance, there was resounding. One voice, though people were coming from different block clubs and positions, but everyone agreed that the problem was, as I indicated, is that it's on the west side, it's highly dense, and there's no green space. It is not like the Bidwell Parkway or Olmsted's, where you will see, MLK Park or Riverside or wherever it is. So everyone just really identified that as a problem, which is similar to, and this is what I think about, is actually when I hear more people identify the issue similarly than them who the community leader is. So in the Fruit Belt, it was, we were trying to accomplish a community land trust, which we did successfully found the first Fruit Belt Community Land Trust. And that's a campaign I will forever be proud of being part of. And, one of the things that they mentioned that they wanted before we even talked about anything was, the parking from the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus has now crept into our neighborhood.
Right.
And this is an elderly population who goes to the grocery store, then they can't find parking. They have to park 3 blocks away. It's like actually a quality of life issue. And that was from whether these people agreed with one another or not, once we figured out all the different fractions, literally they identified the exact same problem.
Yeah.
When we canvassed, it was the same problem. And on the west side, and there's another building we're looking at, right? And those folks identified the same problem. So I more think about, is this something that we're here? Is it a one-off of one person has a sticking point where they're like, I want a basketball court, and so give me the basketball court, and you're like, okay. Or is it, I'm hearing the same resounding problem, and then we're coming together to have a community process around what is the solution to that problem, right? And that's more how we do our work, and how we feel that, or I personally would really be able to distinguish between this is just a person, or this is the community, but not a community leader. Because I think that there's people that are self-appointed community leaders, right. There are people that are truly community leaders, etc. So that's more, that's my rule of thumb.
Yeah, thank you. That again makes a lot of sense to me, but it helps me to hear kind of a concrete example of how you and how Push approach that.
I appreciate all of this. Yeah.
I will squeeze in one more question here.
Good, great.
And so this is it is partly out of my own self-interest as a researcher.
Great. I love it. See, you're an organizer already. Yeah. Self-interest is
that's right.
Fun.
I'll just be very explicit about it. So this is one of the first things I started thinking about when you started talking, and thinking about this transition from extractive to more regenerative. And so I thought about it, and many, people in academia talk about this, but I thought about, as research, a lot of research we do, I'd like to say it's community-based and regenerative. In actuality, it's often more extractive. And I include, a lot of my own work amongst this. I think in a lot of fields, including social work, we are good at talking the talk of being community-based because, on one hand, we're not lab, and I'm not saying this to knock laboratory sciences, but people make a distinction sometimes between the kind of like clinical trials or laboratory-based
Yeah.
research, and like what
Right.
social work does compared to that, we're in the community. So
Sure.
I think
Sure.
a lot of times there's some assumption that like, oh, our work is partnering with communities. And sometimes it really is. I think there are
Sure.
some beautiful examples of that. But a
Yeah.
lot of times it is more extractive. And part of that, I think, is because the power structures we work in, they reward us getting funding and publishing in peer-reviewed
Yeah.
journals. And the way you do
Yeah.
that is kind of get in and get out quickly and get your data and then publish it. You kind of intend to bring it back to the community, but that part doesn't always happen. So
Right.
I'm gonna on my rant. But just, I can't help
It
but think
resonates,
about
yeah.
that part.
Sure.
And so
Sure.
I
Sure.
just, if you have advice, I guess, I don't know, for individual researchers or for this whole structure, like, of course, I would like to have research really be more regenerative and be more on that end of things, or even
Sure.
be something that can help in that transition. But
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's there yet overall. So any guidance or advice for us researchers?
Yeah, I don't know that I have the silver bullet solution.
Sure.
I don't think anyone should look for a silver bullet solution. There's different tactics and strategies that are necessary. Some of the people that I think we've had really good relationships with, as opposed to ones that you're describing that are more extractive and just so you know, we can feel it, we know it
And then
when someone is trying to be extractive and when someone is trying to really fulfill and be part of community and listen to community voice. And so what I always find is that the people we've had the best experiences with, professors and partnerships, are people who are willing to actually come to us first of all, because it is very difficult to go to an academic institution, and it's intimidating at times. It's even intimidating for a person like myself who is educated, and it very much feels detached from the reality of where we are, and so it feels very bunkered. Particularly, we know why UB feels a certain way, historically, and that is something that we are still dealing with ramifications of, right? And so I think anytime we have people come to us and set the terms for, allow us to set the table, like, where do you need us to be? What time is good for you? How do your members want to connect? What is best for, do we need language access for members, especially on the West Side? There's so many different languages spoken. Spanish is primary, for the folks that are our members. And so we, of course, provide language access that we need to get a lot better, I believe. But in our newsletter, it's bilingual now, and our communication and correspondence, but are asking what are the needs to set the table and make sure that everyone's able to participate how they are, to lean on the knowledge of those folks that have been in community for a long time, even if they can't, fully participate in the way that you would want them to, but you're able to make the accommodations that are most necessary for them. I also think the best experiences have, of course, been the agenda setting, like collective agenda setting. So, like, of course, like what you're talking about, and I feel for y'all too, because I've heard and been in relationship with a lot of academics who are like, I have to do, like you said, peer reviewed. It has to be this. I have to get this many published. Blah blah blah. But like, as much as you can, front load that we can set the agenda together, or that is my research going to be significant? Is this the right population or target audience? Am I even talking to the right people right now? Because I think a lot of times I'm going to be very frank, people will do the whole, well, y'all know Black and brown people type of situation, and you're in community with them. And so they just kind of like go to us as like a catch-all, instead of like, no, actually there's people that do mobility justice or disability rights or queer and trans liberation, and like, we're not them, right? Like, we do a lot of things. We've talked about a lot of things, but like, we're just not the catch-all for everything. And so I think also starting with, like, obviously someone with an intimate knowledge of the organization, to have that frank conversation, like you and I having the conversation right now, to be like, does this even make sense for PUSH to be involved? Or do you know resources of other people? So that's just not tokenizing a population, right? And that's not cool. And I do kind of play a gatekeeper role in that, because I just am like not about to have like academics just like throw themselves into the middle of a room and embarrass me, honestly, and then be like, why did you do this to us? Like, what is like that? Like my trust in their trust in me goes down as like I do that, right?
Right.
And then I think you cited this, but I want to say people need to be checking in all along the way with community. Did I hear that right? Is that how you want it reflected? Is your story able to be told? Will you sign off on it being told? Do you want your picture? Do you want, you know, like checking in all along the way, not just at the beginning, not like maybe at the end, but all along the way. And then there has to be some plan to like actually have it be meaningful. And if they're bought in, they're going to be the people that are going to be proud that it's being presented to their community, that they're part of it. And you can see how it falls flat if like you're in a presentation at the end and people are just like, what is even the relevance of this? Like, I don't know.
Right.
And like, this is not what we discussed. And I haven't seen you in 9 months. So like, what the fuck? You can edit that out or not. I'm fine with either. But I think like, these are some, like, I think they're intuitively like understood, but I think like the follow through because of the busyness of life and all the things like actually many times aren't fully executed. And I think that, you know, just continuing to have someone that can guide you and be there. And again, like whenever I see people just like show up, also like when I've seen researchers and academics show up to things in an observation or solidarity role, it goes a long way too. So we've had some folks like Nicole Hallett comes to mind from the law clinic. She's no longer with you all. She is a Chicago now, but she would oftentimes just bring her students and bring us to like protests where no one was speaking. She wasn't speaking. They weren't speaking. They were just listening and understanding. And I was always impressed by that. I'd be like, well, you're bringing your whole class and like no one has a role. And she's like, well, they need to first of all understand like the context before we even get started and like what the work is going to be. And I always really value that. And I know that other organizers really appreciate it as well.
Yeah.
It shows that, you know, it shows that you're willing to invest time outside of like the time that you need for the thing that you need to accomplish, which is a kind of a similar principle that I hear from our Indigenous siblings, which is like, instead of inviting us to your thing, why don't maybe you come like understand that you have some learning to do here before we like get started on like whatever project, like again, your colonial, like your colonizer mind like thinks is important for us. So yeah. I that was kind of rambly, but I hope some of that can be used.
Absolutely. No, and not rambly. I mean, and it's, again, I know these are best practices that I wish were enacted more, but I think it is also useful for all of us to just to like step back for a second and kind of revision what this can and should look like as you were describing. Because if we can envision it, because we're so caught up in everything else, like then we're definitely not going to get there. So I think that is important. I just wanted to say in closing, because I just thought about it as you were describing Push's impact, that this really is life-saving work. And I mean that not just you in Push, but kind of the overall movement. You know, when we're talking about economic transitions that sort of that might sound dry or something to some people, I don't know.
Right.
But it is really people's lives and livelihoods we're talking about, whether that's health disparities, whether that's, you know, kids not having a safe place to play outside, whether, you know, that's all the other kinds of afflictions that come with our current extractive and exploitative economy. So I thank you for this work, and I do feel very lucky to be part of this conversation. It's really important and fundamental. Thank you.
Truly appreciate it. Thank you. And I would love to stay in contact. I'm really intrigued by all of your work as well. And I think we have a lot more to talk about. And Liz, thank you so much. Truly appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Harper, for
Thank you, Liz.
sharing your wisdom and your information and giving us a great insight into Push Buffalo today and all the many realms. So Harper Bishop from Push Buffalo, thank you so much. And Dr. Betsy Bowen.